Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Today, we will hear from Dr. Dave Anderson. Dr. Anderson is a veteran church planter, pastor, author of several books, and is currently serving as the president of Grace School of Theology here in the Woodlands. He is also a member here at Community. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's join Dave as he begins his message.
Now, if you were an artist and wanted to paint the picture of the perfect pastor, what would you paint? Would he be a great orator, a great speaker? Would he be a scholar? Would he be a sensitive, caring, compassionate person? You know, I've had the privilege of sitting under some great pastors. Betty and I were a member of Chuck Swindoll's church for quite some time. A great orator. And when I was at Schofield Memorial Church, Dr. Roper taught me a lot of great things. He had me preach I was a youth pastor, he had me preach one Sunday, and he was critiquing me afterwards, and he said, "Well, son, reminds me of when I was a young preacher. I went to the outskirts of Dallas to a small country church, and only one farmer showed up. And I had prepared an hour-long message, and I was wondering out loud if I should go ahead and give that message." And he said, "Well, son, I don't know much about preaching, but I know this. If I went out to feed my cows and only one cow showed up, I'll be blamed if I wouldn't feed her." So he, with that encouragement, gave his hour-long prepared message. Of course, as a young preacher, he was wondering how he'd done when it was over. Asked the farmer, and the farmer said, "Well, son, I don't know much about preaching, but I know this. If I went out to feed my cows and only one cow showed up, I'll be blamed if I feed her the whole load." That's not that funny. But I have learned a lot from a lot of wonderful pastors. But where do you go when you're hurting? There's one particular pastor that has meant more to me than any other. Matter of fact, he is the perfect pastor, and he's found in Psalm 23. So I want to look at that with you this morning, just in a devotional way. You don't have any notes to take, but I want us to sense what David called up from his past. I don't know what's wrong with my voice this morning, but hopefully you can understand me. Now, to get this context, you have to see David at about 50 years old. He's been king for a while. He's gone through his trials and troubles. And he's trying to draw encouragement himself, and he looks to God, and the Lord, through the Holy Spirit, takes him back to when he was a shepherd boy, tending his sheep. And in that day and time, this would be so wonderful, you just see Israel for a moment. But they would start out in the Judean fields when the grass was green, and the sheep would feed in those fields. And then as the Arabah, the hot wind, would come in off the Mediterranean, it would burn up all the grass. And so they had to head toward Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon still had snow on it in the spring, and that snow would melt, and that would feed then, of course, ultimately the Jordan River. But it would feed pasture lands, plateaus of green grass. And so the shepherd would take his sheep from Judea, just think of Jerusalem in the middle of Judea, and he would go on through Samaria, and he'd go through up toward the Mount Hermon and find plateaus of grass where his sheep could feed. So he made that journey a couple times a year. And so that's what is in David's mind as he gives us this particular psalm. But he starts off with a huge promise, or if you want to call it a premise. He says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Now the reason that's such a huge statement is because of the word want. He says, if the Lord is my shepherd, he will provide everything I need. This Hebrew word for want could be translated lack. He's saying, I won't need anything. He'll provide all my needs. Doesn't say he'll provide all my wants, but he will provide all my needs. If you have a need for companionship and it's not being provided humanly, even that he will provide. He will supernaturally provide for you. Perfect proof of that is Moses. He goes up on the mountain. How long was he up there? 40 days, 40 nights. How long can man exist without food? At least 40 days, longer. How long can he exist without water? About 11 days. So somehow, supernaturally, get this now, supernaturally, God provided the needs to sustain Moses on that mountain 40 days, 40 nights without food and without water. That's how great our God is. And so think of the needs in your life, or think of the lacks in your life. The Lord is your shepherd. If he's your shepherd, he can provide for every single need. That is a huge claim that David is making there. So now, in the rest of the psalm, going verses 2 through 5, he wants to prove what he just claimed. He wants to prove his promise. He wants to prove his proposition. He wants to prove his premise. So he does it in two ways. He says, first of all, God is my provider. Then, in verses 4 and 5, he's going to say, God is also my protector. In verses 2 and 3, he's going to provide for my food, and he's going to provide for my fellowship. Then in verse 4 and 5, he protects me from the unknown, and he protects me from the known. And then he comes to his conclusion after proving his theorem, his premise, his promise in verse 6. So let's kind of back up and walk through this, because he's picturing a journey, this journey from Judea all the way to Mount Hermon. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. Sheep often are scared easily, and they'll run back and forth across the pasture land. They don't know enough to know when they need to feed and when they need to water sometimes. And so in cases like that, the shepherd will actually have to pick the sheep up and cause it to lie down so it will feed, and then take it to the water so it will drink. Sometimes they just won't do either one. So he will provide for the food for the sheep, and he'll also provide for the water it needs. Now, in those times, they would come to a sheep, if it came to a stream, it instinctively knew if its coat got wet, it would drown quickly. So if it came to a running stream, it would stop short. It wouldn't drink the water. So in cases like that, the shepherd would take his crook of his staff, he would wrench free some rocks, he'd make a little dam. And so that portion of the stream, he would slow the water down so it was still, and the sheep could drink. He leads me beside still waters. Is it a stretch to say we don't know when we need to feed and drink? Sometimes we go for days, weeks, maybe months without feeding spiritually. Or we come to church once a week and think that's enough. But physically, if you ate once a week, how healthy would you be? Probably not too healthy. Most of us don't suffer from that problem. But you can see what I'm saying. So if we come to church once a week and expect Pastor Dan or whoever to feed us, to carry us through the week, we're going to be starving spiritually. We will be hurting spiritually. And sometimes the pastor, the good shepherd, will actually have to lift us up and set us down and help kind of force feed us to sustain us and keep us going. And so he says he provides for my food. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. But he also provides for our fellowship. He restores my soul. He leads me by the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now, if you could see again the countryside in Judea and look at one of the hills, centuries of sheep wandering over those paths have worn them into the hillside. There are no trees. It just paths everywhere. If you look at my fingers here, this is the way the paths look, all over the place. The sheep don't know which way to go. They don't have a good sense of direction. And so they rely on the shepherd to get them long miles away by leading down the right paths as they go along. In fact, that's the way I would translate this. He leads me in the right path for his name's sake. Of course, the right path is the righteous path. And notice it's for his name's sake. He is more interested in us going down the right path than we are, because his name is at stake. his reputation is at stake as he looks at us and helps to try to guide us as we go along. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now, sometimes a sheep, without a sense of direction, like a cat or a dog, will wander off from the flock. They have their nose to the ground, and they just kind of see one green clump after another, and they just kind of follow the green clumps of grass. And then it gets lost. And that's when the darkness comes in, the cry of the wolf is heard, the sheep begin to shudder. It needs its shepherd. Of course, the shepherd will notice missing sheep and trace the path back that they came on until it finds the sheep. Then, if it's a young, like a lamb, it will just pick it up and carry it back to the flock. Sometimes the same sheep would become a frequent offender. He would get lost. He would get lost over and over. In that case, the shepherd would do something that seems cruel. He would pick up the little lamb and actually break one of its legs. Of course, the sheep couldn't walk. He'd make a splint for it, and then he would just carry it until the bone had healed enough that he could test it out by walking and limping on the ground right by the shepherd. Finally, it would heal, and he could walk okay. But in the midst of that, that little lamb had learned a very, very valuable lesson. It never got very far from the shepherd again. Has the Lord ever had to break your leg? He has mine. In fact, more than once. I'm kind of stubborn, slow learner. But from those broken legs, I've learned the fear of the Lord. And I've learned not to stray very far from him. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, we're told in Proverbs. Now, you say, well, that's such a cruel thing to do. Is it really? From our limited human perspective, it may seem cruel, but not from his. Everything he's doing is love. It's to help us stay close to him. It's to help us to not wander off and become eaten up by the roaring lion who seeks whom he may devour. Having been a pastor for over 40 years, I watched pastor after pastor bite the dust. Matter of fact, when I was in seminary, Charles Rowery, I still remember in class, said, look at the guy on your right, look at the guy on your left. Only one out of three of you will be standing 40 years from now. What causes men to leave the ministry? According to Dr. Dan, 60% of pastors wish they had another job. That's pretty sad, isn't it? And so we need to understand that when times like this seem like they are crazy and don't make any sense, it's the loving shepherd, it's the good shepherd who is trying to reach out to us and help us and draw us closer to himself. Well, he provides for our food, green pastures, still waters, provides for our fellowship. He restores our soul, leads us in the right path for his name's sake. So he is our provider, but he's also our protector. Verse 4 and 5, he protects us from the unknown. In verse 4, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now in Hebrew, this reads a little differently. When I walk through the valley of deep darkness is literally what it says. And this is a real place that I take tourists to when we do tours of Israel. It's called Wadi Kelt. And it's so steep, the ravine is so steep, that in the middle of the day, it's dark at the bottom. They're just shadows. And yet this is part of the path on the way up. But when they go through that particular path, there's no time that the sheep need to keep their eyes on the shepherd or listen to his voice more than when they're in the valley of deep darkness. The wolves seem to line the ravine and start shouting "Olay" like spectators at a bullfight when the sheep enter that valley. That's the time that they need the shepherd. And that's the time they can't see the shepherd. It's the valley of deep darkness. Where are you, Lord? I can't see you. That's the time they need to reach out and listen to his voice. Talk to me, Lord. Tell me something. Encourage me. That's the time. in the valley of deep darkness, that we need to be close to him. And you know what? You can't get to the plush pastures above without going through the deep darkness below. There's no other way. You can't get to the plush pastures above without going through the deep darkness below. Some Christian leaders, teachers have called it the dark night of the soul. But it's a time when you start to question everything you believe. It's a time when the trials are so heavy and they hurt so much, you're wondering if you'll ever make it. And in that darkness, that's when you need to be listening more than ever to his voice, to looking ever for him. You know instinctively, though, as you take each step of faith, that his rod and his staff have the power to overcome any problem you could run into. And they will comfort you. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. Well, we're through the valley now, and we're starting to go up. And as we go up, you hit different plateaus as you're going up Mount Hermon. The table, prepares a table before me, is talking about making the plateau ready. Now, they had an enemy in Israel. If you read Lawrence of Arabia, the book, you'll find that there's a poisonous snake in that area, a little brown adder, but quite poisonous. And it would hide in holes around the plateau, waiting for the sheep to come. Then it would slip out and bite a sheep on the nose. Sometimes it was fatal. And so to prepare for his sheep, the shepherd would take a flask of oil and do two things. One, he would pour some on the head of his sheep. Secondly, he would find the hole and put the oil around the hole, so that when the sheep came near the hole and the snake smelled the sheep, it would try to get out, but it couldn't slide through the ring of oil. And secondly, it didn't like the smell, so it would repulse the snake. In doing so, he had prepared a table, a plateau of green grass for his sheep. But he wasn't finished. There weren't any rivers up there, and so they had wells. Sometimes a well would be 100 feet deep. A hireling, someone hired to watch over the sheep, would not fill the trough all the way, maybe just part way. But the good shepherd, the great shepherd, he would fill that trough all the way. He would keep working until his muscles were worn out, filling that trough with water so the whole flock of sheep could drink of that water. He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. I remember when I was going to school here in Houston, I got involved with Camp Crusade for Christ, and they had what was called Splash Day. Well, Crusade didn't have Splash Day. Splash Day was something that local colleges had, even some from Oklahoma. It was a day, first day of spring break, and they would all go down to Galveston and kind of have a riot. It was rumored that Hell's Angels were coming in. Now, I was heading a group of people to go down and witness on the beach. We'd take our clipboards and our gospel tract and talk to people if they wanted to talk, never be pushy. So as head of this thing, I started getting calls from parents. Don't take my kid down there. My kid's not going to be part of that. They were afraid. They were afraid of Hell's Angels. They were afraid of riots. They were afraid of drunks. Who knows what they were afraid of? So I talked to the leader of our group, and he said, there's no safer place than when you're in the middle of God's will. There's no safer place than when you're in the middle of God's will. Do we think it's his will that we go down there and witness? We all agreed it was his will. So we did. In the morning, we were on East Beach. Didn't see any trouble whatsoever. Led scores of people to Christ, at least professions of faith. Then in the afternoon, we went to West Beach. Didn't see any trouble at all. Led scores of people to Christ. Came back for an evening rendezvous to share stories. Found out on the news that Hell's Angels had come, and they'd been stomping cars in, roof down, hood down, making a huge mess. We never saw them. Because while we were on East Beach, they were on West Beach. And while we were on West Beach, they were on East Beach. The Lord had prepared a table before us in the midst of our enemies. That's what he'll do. But it's not just from our enemies on outside the church. Sometimes, God forbid, there are enemies inside the church. Little adders with forked tongues who like to snap and bite and undermine. And those are some of the hardest things a pastor has to deal with. Nevertheless, even in that situation, your cup runneth over. Now that cup runneth over, I was of course talking about the trough of water that he fills to the very brim. So I think he's proved his premise. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He is the great shepherd. At best, we humans are under-shepherds. We have our flaws. There is no perfect pastor among humans. If you want to know a list of my faults, Betty keeps a list in her purse. Anytime, she's glad to share it with you. I remember I'd spend most of my youth getting ready to go to med school. And in the middle of seminary, middle of Rice, I decided to go on to seminary and then go to med school. So I was telling my mother that I was going to do this. We were driving down Chickering Lane, Nashville, Tennessee. I thought she'd run off the road. She did pull off. And I told her I was going to go to seminary. She looked back at me. She gave me 10 reasons why I would fail. I'd never make it. And, you know, I couldn't argue with any of them. She was right about all of them. But by God's grace, He's used me. So the premise, if the Lord is your shepherd, you shall not want. Some people have said that's the key to the whole psalm. It's not the word shepherd. It's not the word Lord. It's just a two-letter word, M-Y. Is that something you can say? Is the Lord your shepherd? If he is, then his conclusions in verse 6. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Now, some people have suggested those were the names of his sheepdogs. And in Hebrew, the first word, goodness, tov, can mean good. It can also mean happy. It can also mean prosper. And then the word for mercy is the strongest word for love in the Old Testament. Chesed, I'm sure you've heard about it before. It came from the mother stork who would fight to save her young until she died, fight to the death. So it's saying that of God's love, that he will fight to the death for you. Is God going to die? Not lately. He's fighting for the death for you. That's how much he loves you. I have a sister who loves dogs. She went to Scotland to learn how to be a shepherdess. She bought 100 acres up in Kentucky, bought 100 sheep, began training border collies. $3,000 a dog to train them. So I watched her one day with her little whistle. She can control those sheepdogs from half a mile away. She can make them go left, right, or come by you, she would say. She can do what I call the Australian shuffle. She can make them sneak up on the sheep on all fours. And then the right moment, she can do a little whistle, and they'll pop up and start circling the sheep and sending them in a certain direction. So I can just see her naming her sheepdogs, Chesed, Tov, come by you. That'll do. That's David with his sheep, bringing back good memories, bringing back confidence that in this life he'll have an abundant life. Oh, he's going to make mistakes. He's poured out his heart in seeking forgiveness from the Lord for his mistakes in Psalm 51 and Psalm 32. But he's had a prosperous life. If you go over to Israel, it will amaze you to see the reverence they have, the Jewish people, for King David. They almost turn him into a god. He is so highly revered. They have a special place where they call it his tomb. You go in and watch that. There'll be all sorts of Jews standing in a circle around there doing their prayer thing. You don't take pictures in there. They're highly offended. You take a picture of them praying when they're praying with David in their mind, in their presence. So this is King David looking back and saying, I think I'll have an abundant life. Here's the proof. He's my provider. He's my protector. But more than that, I think that's proof that I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's a statement of eternal security. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Do you have that kind of assurance? If you were to die today, do you know for sure, if you went to the pearly gates and Peter said, "Why should I let you in?" And you said, "Because the Lord is my shepherd," that he'd let you in? He will, if the Lord is your shepherd. Can you say that?
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in the Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link, www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.